Rita Baker had not planned on stepping foot inside a fortress-sized mansion before sunrise, not with her toddler asleep on her shoulder, her back aching from a night shift, and her bank account threatening to embarrass her again. She had applied for what she thought was a simple live-in housekeeping job, the kind that required wiping surfaces, folding sheets, and staying quiet. Nothing more. Nothing complicated. Nothing that demanded more energy than she had left. But the moment the iron gates slid open and two armed guards motioned her through, she knew this job would be anything but simple. She stood on the gravel driveway for a moment, holding Ava closer and inhaling the cold air that clung to the morning. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and the weight of the night shift still sat heavily on her spine. A long bus ride followed by a steep walk uphill had left her legs trembling, but she kept going. She had no choice. Her rent was overdue, the electricity company had warned her twice about disconnection, and daycare fees were waiting to pounce on her next paycheck. That paycheck, of course, would be barely enough to buy food after the deductions. If you're enjoying this story, please hit the subscribe button. It keeps the family growing and guarantees you don't miss the next move. Turn on notifications, you'll want to know when the next tale drops. Ava stirred and rubbed her cheek against Rita's collarbone. It reminded Rita why she was here, why she had taken this risk, why she had ignored every internal alarm that told her showing up at a mysterious estate in the middle of nowhere was a terrible idea. The guard nearest her stepped forward. He was tall and stone-faced, the kind of man who probably never smiled unless threatened. Name. Rita swallowed hard. Rita Baker. I applied for the housekeeping position. She shifted Ava on her hip and tried not to look intimidated. The guard checked a digital tablet, then raised an eyebrow as if surprised she had actually shown up. He motioned toward the walkway. Follow the driveway. Someone is inside waiting for you. His tone suggested she should reconsider before taking another step. But reconsideration was a luxury she had not been able to afford for a long time. The mansion came into view as she walked. It was massive and silent, its tall windows dark and watchful, its walls built like something from a foreign movie about power and danger. It looked nothing like the warm kitchen scenes she sometimes daydreamed about, where a man with steady arms drank his morning coffee, while two laughing toddlers kicked their feet in matching high chairs. In that dream, the air smelled like pancakes and safety. This place smelled like money, stone, and gun oil. Still, she followed the path that led to the front entrance. Her breath felt tight by the time a woman with sharp eyes and a tight bun opened the door. Her name tag read Lucia. Lucia took one look at Rita's exhaustion, the drooping toddler on her shoulder, the overstuffed diaper bag sliding down her arm, and hesitation washed over her face. You are the applicant? Lucia asked carefully. Rita nodded. Yes. Housekeeping. Lucia pressed her lips together. The listing said housekeeping, because that is what we hoped for. Truthfully, every nanny we have hired has quit in less than a day. Some lasted only an hour. The children are too difficult, and no one can get them to calm. Rita blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. Children? 1-year-old twins. Lucia sighed. Beautiful boys. Absolutely inconsolable. We are short-staffed and overwhelmed. You came highly recommended by your previous hotel employer. We hoped you would help with cleaning, but right now we need someone who can go near the nursery without collapsing. Rita adjusted Ava on her hip. Something in her chest responded instinctively. A tug almost like recognition. And then she heard it. Screaming. Not angry. Not fussy. Desperate. It echoed through the halls like a physical pressure, shaking the silence around them. One of the staff members coming down the hallway winced as the cries rose even louder. Rita felt her feet move before her mind caught up. Something in her body reacted faster than logic. A mother does not need permission to go toward a crying child. She simply goes. The sound pulled her deeper into the mansion. She passed tall columns and marble floors that gleamed under the morning light. She passed staff members who looked too exhausted to offer greetings. She passed doors that seemed too grand for any ordinary family. Lucia followed her with hurried steps. The babies have not slept properly in 3 nights. They refuse bottles. They throw food. They scream until they choke. No one can touch them without making it worse. Rita barely heard the explanation. The cries were sharper now, slicing through the hall, pushing her forward. They reached the nursery, where 3 employees stood helpless near 2 white cribs. Inside them, the twins were red-faced, sweating, kicking their little legs, and trembling in frustration. Bottles lay scattered on the floor. Toys were abandoned. One of the staff members had dark rings under her eyes and looked ready to burst into tears herself. Rita did not pause. She did not wait for instructions. She stepped into the room and lifted the first child into her arms. His tiny fists hit her shoulder once, twice, then faltered as she began to hum. A simple tune, soft and low, the same melody she used whenever Ava startled awake during storms. She moved gently, swaying in slow circles. The second twin was still screaming in his crib. Rita reached for him too, balancing both boys against her chest. Their cries fractured, then weakened, then dissolved into hiccups. She whispered with patience and held them close until their bodies relaxed. A strange stillness filled the room. The staff stared at her like she had done something supernatural. Rita turned slightly, adjusting the babies so their heads rested on her shoulders. Her eyes drifted toward the doorway. Someone was standing there. Ricardo Sima. Tattooed arms. An unreadable face. A heavy presence that made the air feel different. He held a coffee mug in one hand, though he seemed to have forgotten it. His gaze was fixed on her and the babies, like he could not quite believe what he was seeing. The staff grew tense around him. His reputation traveled through walls and hushed conversations. He was not a man people looked at directly without caution. But Rita held his gaze anyway. She was too tired to be intimidated and too focused on the twins who were finally breathing steadily against her. The room felt different now. The cold mansion seemed a little warmer. And Rita had no idea her life had just shifted. Ricardo took one slow step into the nursery. His voice was quiet, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. They never calm for anyone. Rita kept rocking the twins. They are exhausted. They just needed someone who was not afraid to touch them. Something in his expression changed, something subtle and unreadable. Then he glanced at Lucia. Prepare a room for her. Rita blinked. Wait, I have not even started working. You just did, Ricardo replied. His tone left no space for argument. Lucia nodded and gestured for the staff to clear the nursery. Rita stayed exactly where she was, holding the babies who finally drifted into soft, steady breathing. She did not know who Ricardo Sima truly was. She did not know why armed guards stood at the gate or why the mansion felt like a fortress. She did not know what kind of world she had just stepped into. All she knew was that 2 fragile little boys had clung to her as if she were the first calm they had ever known. And that was enough to keep her standing there, even as fate quietly rearranged every part of her life. For a long moment, no one moved. The twins rested against Rita's shoulders, their breaths still shaky, but finally steady. Ricardo stepped farther into the nursery, his gaze fixed on the boys as if he were seeing strangers in his own home. How did you do that? He asked quietly. Rita tightened her hold on the twins. I didn't do anything, she said. It is just instinct. I guess they needed someone who knows what it feels like to be tired and overwhelmed. Lucia let out a fragile breath. The babies have been like this since their mother passed. It happened shortly after childbirth. Her voice softened, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the calm that had just settled. Ricardo's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. His attention stayed locked on Rita. She could feel the intensity of it, not threatening but weighted, as if he was trying to figure out what she had that everyone else lacked. The twins' little hands clung to her shirt, as if they had known her longer than 5 minutes. Ricardo focused on her again. You have a child of your own. The little girl you brought. Ava, Rita murmured. Yes. She is too. I cannot leave her. I would have no one to watch her anyway, and daycare is not something I can afford right now. What is your living situation? He asked. The question was straightforward, but the room seemed to tighten around it. Rita shifted the babies slightly before answering. Not great. I have been falling behind on bills. I work night shifts, so I bring Ava with me sometimes because I cannot risk leaving her alone. That is why I applied for this job. I needed something stable. Ricardo nodded once. Then he looked at the twins again, at their peaceful faces pressed into her shoulders. His expression changed, almost unnoticeably, as if something long frozen cracked under the weight of the moment. Fine, he said. You can have the job. On one condition. Ava lives here too. The staff blinked. Lucia's mouth parted. One of the nursery attendants actually straightened as if she thought she misheard him. Ricardo Sima did not make emotional decisions. He did not hire on impulse. He did not offer conditions that favored anyone but himself. Rita looked down at the babies, then at Ricardo, unsure she had interpreted him correctly. You want my daughter to live here? If you're going to care for them, then you cannot be torn between this place and wherever you are staying. And they clearly respond to you. So yes. Both of you will stay. The shock rippled across the room again. Rita hesitated. The estate was impressive, but it was also intimidating. Guards posted at the entrance. Cameras fixed in every corner. A house built like it expected danger at its doorstep. Was this really the place to raise a toddler? I do not know, she admitted softly. It is a beautiful home, but it feels guarded. Locked. I want Ava safe, but this place feels like a world I do not understand. Ricardo stepped forward, not close enough to startle the twins, but close enough that his voice reached her with a quiet certainty. This estate is safer than any neighborhood you can afford right now. No one gets in without clearance. Nothing happens here without being noticed. Your daughter will be watched, protected, and comfortable. I do not offer that lightly. Lucia cleared her throat and picked up the packet of employment documents from the dresser. It is a live-in role, she said. You and Ava will have your own private room with a small sitting area. Meals provided. Flexible hours as long as the twins are cared for. And the pay is generous. Generous was an understatement. The number written on the paper made Rita's chest tighten. It was more than she had earned in the last 3 months combined. She looked from the contract to the twins. Their tiny fingers curled against her like they trusted her already. Then she glanced at Ricardo again. Beneath his inked arms and hardened expression, she sensed something she had not seen before. A buried loneliness he tried to suffocate with silence and responsibility. She nodded slowly. If Ava stays with me, then yes. I will take the job. For the first time, something like relief flickered across his face. Good, he said simply. Lucia will arrange everything. The twins stirred in her arms. Their lashes fluttered, but they did not cry. Not even a whimper. The staff exchanged looks that teetered between disbelief and gratitude. That evening, Rita carried Ava up the narrow staircase of their old apartment. Ava slept on her shoulder, her small breaths warm against Rita's neck. The single light bulb in the hallway flickered as she pushed their door open. Inside, everything felt smaller than it had that morning. The peeling paint. The dented pot on the stove. The cracked window she kept sealed with tape to block the dust from drifting in. She packed quietly, careful not to wake Ava. A few clothes. A toy rabbit with one missing button eye. A faded blanket her mother had crocheted years ago. She looked around the room one last time. It had been more of a shelter than a home. A place where she survived, not where she lived. Ava stirred. Rita brushed a hand over her cheek. Things are changing, sweetheart, she whispered. We're going somewhere better now. Somewhere new. Her words trembled with hope. For the first time in a long while, hope felt real. Morning light stretched across the pavement as Rita stepped out of the taxi with 2 worn bags and Ava propped on her hip. The estate gates towered just as they had the day before, tall and silent, guarded by men who barely blinked as they checked her name and waved her through. It felt unreal that she belonged here now, a place that looked like it could swallow her whole. Inside, Lucia waited at the entrance. You arrived right on time. Let me show you to your room. They walked down a hallway lined with polished floors and framed artwork. It should have felt luxurious, but the air carried a strange heaviness, as if conversations never happened here unless necessary, and laughter echoed too loudly to survive. Lucia opened a door near the east wing. "This is yours." The room surprised her. It was modest compared to the rest of the mansion, but warm in a way she did not expect. Soft beige walls. A twin bed for her. A small toddler bed for Ava, neatly placed near the window. A dresser. A mini shelf with a small lamp. Not extravagant, but gentle. Thoughtful. Ava wriggled out of her arms and toddled across the rug, touching everything with curious fingers. "It is perfect," Rita said quietly. Lucia gave a small smile. "You are the first new face here who has said that." Before Rita could respond, a sudden wave of crying drifted from the hallway. Loud. Sharp. The kind that made the walls vibrate. Lucia winced. The twins. They started again about 15 minutes ago. Rita stepped into the hall just as two staff members hurried past, both looking panicked. "They will not take their bottles," one muttered. "They will not let anyone near them." Rita followed the sound to the nursery. The moment she entered, the babies reached for her through their tears, tiny arms trembling. Ava peeked around her legs and watched them, as if trying to understand why they were so upset. Rita picked up the closest twin first, then the other, settling them against her shoulders. She hummed without thinking, the same soft melody she had sung since Ava was an infant. The twins' cries wavered, then dropped into small whimpers. Their fingers curled into her shirt again. Ava stepped closer and touched one baby's foot with gentle curiosity. "There you go," Rita whispered. "It is all right. I am here." The room calmed. Even the staff seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. A presence filled the doorway, heavy but still. Ricardo stood watching them, silent, hands in his pockets. Morning light touched the ink on his arms and the edges of his jaw. He did not speak. He only observed, eyes shifting from the twins to Rita, then unexpectedly to Ava. Ava looked up at him. For a moment, neither moved. Then she walked toward him with her tiny steps, holding out the toy she carried, a rabbit with long ears and a faint stain of yesterday's juice on its belly. Ricardo froze as if she had handed him something dangerous. He looked down at her, unsure what to do. Ava remained patient, her arms stretched upward. Finally, he accepted the rabbit. The smallest shift happened in his face. Not a smile, not amusement, but something quieter. Something human. When Ava toddled back to Rita's side, Ricardo placed the toy gently on the dresser, careful not to drop it. Rita's heart softened more than she expected. Later, when the twins were calmer, Rita went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. No one had asked her to, but her instinct said the house needed something simple. Something normal. She mixed flour, whisked batter, sliced fruit, and worked the pan with a rhythm she knew by heart. Ava sat on the counter swinging her feet, watching with bright eyes. The twins were placed in high chairs nearby. They stared at Rita, not crying, not afraid, just curious. Their hands opened and closed as if trying to grab the smell of vanilla in the air. The kitchen, which had felt cold when she first stepped in, warmed with the scent of food and the tiny murmurs of children. Lucia paused at the doorway, watching with disbelief. "They have never been this calm in the kitchen," she said softly. Rita set small pieces of fruit on the trays in front of the twins. "Maybe they like the noise. Or the smell. Or the company," Lucia said. "This house has been silent for so long. It feels like it forgot what life sounded like." Footsteps approached, slow and steady. Ricardo entered with a mug, his usual tension softened around the edges. He leaned against the counter, studying the scene as if it was something rare. Ava looked up and reached her hand toward him again. He blinked, almost startled, then stepped closer so she could pat his arm with approval. He looked strangely at peace, as if this small kitchen scene allowed him to breathe. Rita served breakfast to the staff who had gathered near the doorway, unsure if they were allowed to sit but unwilling to leave the calm she had created. When she finally sat down with a plate for herself and Ava, she noticed Ricardo still standing there, watching the twins nibble on fruit. "I have not heard this much quiet from them since they were born," he said. Rita shrugged lightly. "Maybe they just needed someone new." Maybe, he echoed, his gaze lingering on her a moment longer. Lucia stepped close and lowered her voice. You should know something. This mansion has felt like a tomb since the twins arrived. Silent hallways, closed doors, staff walking on eggshells. There was grief everywhere, even when no one spoke about it. You have been here for a few hours and something already feels different. Rita looked at Ava, then the twins, then Ricardo. She had not planned on changing anything. She only wanted a job, a place to breathe, a place safe enough for her daughter. But somehow, without trying, she had stepped into a broken house and given it its first pulse of warmth. And the mansion, which once felt like a fortress, no longer seemed quite as cold. Rita settled quickly into life inside the mansion, not with grand plans or strict rules, but with small, gentle choices that added up quietly. Each morning began with a rhythm she built around the twins' needs. Soft feeding sessions where she held them close, slow rocking until their tiny bodies unwound, a warm palm resting against the back of their heads, a hum that had soothed Ava since she was born. The twins responded to these touches as if discovering them for the first time, memorizing the feeling of safety. The staff noticed the changes before anyone said it out loud. There were fewer frantic runs down the hall, fewer meltdowns echoing through the nursery. The twins' naps stretched longer. Their cries, once sharp and constant, softened into ordinary baby fussing that could be soothed with a simple touch. Even Ava's presence became part of the calm. Her giggles filled corners of the nursery that had never known laughter. The twins watched her with wide eyes, absorbing the sound until it became familiar. Sometimes, when Ava burst into carefree laughter, the twins attempted their own versions, tiny breaths that sounded like the beginning of joy. Rita treasured those moments, seeing how children taught one another more easily than adults ever could. As she observed the twins day by day, she began to understand them better. Their distress had never come from misbehavior. It came from the absence of consistent nurturing, the kind of physical and emotional presence babies needed to thrive. Their needs had been met by rotating staff members who cared but never stayed long enough to build trust. Rita offered something different. Her presence was steady, predictable, warm. To help them explore the world safely, she introduced small sensory activities. Warm baths where the water relaxed their tense limbs. Textured toys with soft edges for curious fingers. Gentle music during the quieter hours of the morning. Short walks in the garden when the sunlight was still tender, letting the twins feel a breeze that was not filtered through a window. Their bodies loosened in her arms. Their eyes brightened. Their hands opened more often. Lucia delivered daily reports to Ricardo, who listened without comment, but with growing curiosity. The change was undeniable. The twins were no longer the restless, inconsolable infants the staff had tiptoed around. They were becoming children who felt safe. Ricardo began appearing more often in doorways, watching without interrupting. Rita noticed how still he stood, as if afraid to enter a space that did not belong to him. She also noticed how he studied everything, how she held the babies, how she moved through the room, how Ava interacted with her daughter, how peace replaced chaos. He looked like a man trying to understand something he had only observed from a distance. One evening, long after most of the house had quieted, Rita walked toward the nursery to check on the twins before bed. The door was partly open. Light spilled gently across the floor. Inside, Ricardo stood by one of the cribs, his hands resting on the railing. He stared at the small blankets, as if expecting them to reveal answers he had not found anywhere else. There was a stillness in him she had not seen before. Not his usual controlled quiet. This was something heavier. Something that clung to his shoulders. Rita stepped inside, moving slowly. "Are you all right?" He did not look at her. "I thought they hated me," he said softly. She stood beside him, leaving enough space so he would not feel cornered. "They don't hate you." He exhaled sharply. "They cry whenever I walk into a room." "They cried with everyone," she said gently. "They cried because they didn't feel safe yet. Babies do not know how to hate. They only know what they experience and what they need." He finally turned to her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "And what do they need?" You, she answered. Not perfection. Just presence. They don't expect more than that. Her words landed deeper than she intended. She saw it in the way he blinked slowly, as if bracing himself against something vulnerable. A truth he had never let anyone speak to him before. A truth he did not know how to hold. He stepped back, almost as if escaping. I have work to do, he said abruptly. Then he left the room, leaving behind the faint echo of a man shaken not by anger, but by the realization of how much he had kept himself apart. Rita watched the doorway long after he disappeared, hoping he understood that guilt was not the same as failure, and that healing, whether for a child or a guarded man, was something that began slowly, in moments just like this one. The next morning carried a quiet weight, the kind that settles after an emotional shift no one has spoken about yet. Rita noticed it first in the halls. Staff moved with the same precision as always, but there was a softness under it, a faint easing of tension she had not felt before. Even the twins seemed to sense the change, glancing toward the doorway more often as if expecting someone they were still learning to trust. Lucia found Rita in the kitchen, prepping breakfast while Ava tried to arrange her toy animals in a neat line. The older woman hesitated before speaking, as if deciding whether to open a door that was usually kept locked. You spoke to him last night, Lucia said quietly. Rita placed sliced fruit into 2 tiny bowls. He was in the nursery. I only told him the truth. Lucia nodded, though her eyes carried a far heavier story. Truth is something Ricardo has not let close for a long time. Rita paused, sensing there was more behind the comment. When Lucia finally continued, her voice was low. He inherited all of this in the middle of chaos. His family controlled large territories. After his father passed, there was a violent struggle for power. Many people wanted what he now protects. Rita absorbed the words, a thread of understanding weaving through her thoughts. The mansion that felt like a fortress was not exaggerated design. It was history and fear built into walls and gates. Lucia continued. His wife softened him. She was the one person who made this place feel like a home. When she died after the twins were born, something in him shut down. He thought keeping everything controlled would keep everyone safe. Rita finished stirring the pancake batter, her hands moving automatically while her mind pieced together the fragments. No wonder the staff behaved like every step needed permission. No wonder security felt like the air itself. No wonder Ricardo stood at a distance from his own children. His entire life had been shaped by danger. Later that afternoon, as the twins drifted through a peaceful nap, Rita found Ricardo on the balcony outside his office. He leaned on the railing, jaw set, eyes narrowed at the view that stretched far beyond the estate walls. She approached quietly. Lucia told me a bit about your past. His eyes shifted to her, unreadable. I imagine it sounded ugly. It sounded like it cost you a lot, she said. More than most people ever lose. He did not answer, but that silence held more truth than denial. Rita stepped beside him, hands clasped in front of her. Can I ask something? He gave a short nod. Why keep a staff that is afraid to even touch your children? Why create a home where everyone whispers instead of talks? His eyes hardened for a moment, then softened with something more honest. Control is how I keep them safe. If people fear crossing boundaries, they will follow rules. And if they follow rules, nothing slips through. Nothing reaches the twins. Rita studied him. His logic was precise, built from a lifetime of surviving threats. But she saw the fracture lines too. But that kind of protection still leaves them alone. You are keeping danger out, but you are also keeping yourself out. And they feel both. His breath slowed, almost unsteady. It was the first time someone had spoken to him, without measuring every word, without flinching. That is not abandonment, he asked quietly. It is, she said, her voice gentle. Not because you do not care, but because caring from a distance still feels like distance. The truth lingered between them, neither harsh nor accusing, simply real. Ricardo turned his gaze away, eyes fixed on the distant tree line as if searching for answers he had never allowed himself to consider. He looked conflicted, wrestling with the part of him that wanted to protect, and the part that wished he knew how to hold his children without fear. Rita left him with that unspoken struggle, giving him space to decide what to do with it. That night, as the mansion grew quiet, Rita passed by the nursery on her way to settle Ava. The door was cracked open. A faint glow filled the room. Ricardo sat between the twin cribs, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He was not touching the babies, not speaking, not moving. He simply sat there, breathing in the same space as his sons, letting himself exist near them without the shield of fear. It was the longest he had ever stayed. And in the stillness, something in him began to shift, almost imperceptibly, like the first soft turn of a key in a rusted lock. The next morning began quietly, the way new routines often do. Rita decided the house needed something simple, something human, something that reminded everyone inside these walls that life did not have to feel like a series of guarded steps. She cooked breakfast the way she would in a small apartment kitchen. Pancakes, eggs, soft fruit, warm plates set on the long dining table that had spent too much time untouched. Lucia raised her brows at the setup, but said nothing. Staff members watched from a distance, uncertain if Ricardo would approve or shut it down. Rita kept her focus on the twins, settling them into their high chairs while Ava hummed beside her, swinging her little legs and waiting for her plate. When Ricardo appeared in the doorway, the room shifted. Not abruptly, not with fear, but with the kind of pause that comes when a man is unexpected in a place he rarely visits during daylight. He hesitated before stepping in, as if unsure whether he had the right to sit at a table meant for warmth. The twins reacted before anyone else. Their eyes widened. Their hands lifted. Their bodies straightened in their chairs. They stared at him with a quiet excitement he had never noticed before. Rita smiled softly. "You can join us if you want." He gave a small nod and sat across from Ava, who immediately pushed a piece of pancake toward him. "Here," she said proudly. Ricardo froze for a second, then took it with a faint smile that startled the staff watching from the hall. Ava beamed, pleased with herself. And although he ate carefully, almost awkwardly, something gentle flickered across his face every time one of the twins squealed or Ava offered him another bite. They created a rhythm in those mornings without speaking it aloud. The children were not just babies anymore. They were small souls seeking connection, and somehow in the middle of his fortress, Ricardo found himself becoming part of something that resembled a family. Whispers began circulating through the staff. The mansion did not echo anymore. Footsteps did not bounce off the walls the same way. Voices carried warmth instead of tension. It was as if the house itself noticed the change and softened. Rita noticed how Ricardo lingered after breakfast, watching the twins with something that looked almost like wonder. Their eyes followed him everywhere now. They crawled toward him, reached for his hands, looked to him for reassurance. One afternoon, after the children finished playing with blocks, Ricardo stopped Rita near the kitchen. His voice was quieter than usual. "You told me about your daughter. But what about you? What did you want before all of this?" She paused, surprised by the shift. He was asking about dreams, not duties. "I wanted a home I could afford. Something steady. I grew up learning to live with disappointment. I just want Ava to know stability." He studied her as though searching for the parts of her story she had not said aloud. "And her father?" "He left when Ava was a few months old," she answered. He said, "He was not ready to be a parent. He walked out before I even knew what to say." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Coward." Rita breathed out slowly. "I got used to being alone. But that does not mean it was easy." These conversations began to happen more often. Quiet moments in the hall. Soft exchanges during evening feedings. The kind of talks that carried a growing trust, layered with something neither of them wanted to name yet but both of them felt. One evening, during playtime in the nursery, the twins crawled toward Ricardo. Not just halfway. All the way. They reached his feet and stretched their arms up, making small, impatient sounds. Rita watched him freeze, uncertainty locking him in place. "They want you to hold them," she said gently. "I do not want to hurt them," he whispered. "You will not." He still hesitated, so she stepped close, guiding his hands with calm patience. She placed the first twin into his right arm, then the second against his left side. His body tensed at first, unfamiliar with the weight of small children pressed against him without fear. But the twins settled instantly, their tiny hands clutching his shirt as if finally relieved to reach him. One twin laid his cheek against Ricardo's chest, his breath slowing into soft comfort. The other babbled quietly, touching the pattern of his shirt as though memorizing it. Ricardo stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on them, his expression slowly unraveling. Something inside him shifted, not violently, but like a locked door opening from the inside. His breath trembled. His jaw softened. His eyes warmed in a way he did not try to hide. Rita saw the moment it happened, the moment his fear loosened enough to let love in. It was the first time he held them without distance, and it changed something in all of them. The night had settled into a rare calm, one of those evenings when the estate felt almost ordinary. Rita had just finished humming the twins to sleep while Ava curled beside her with a picture book, her lashes fluttering as she drifted off. For a moment, the world outside felt distant, harmless, almost irrelevant. Then the alarm shattered the silence. A sharp, metallic buzz cut through the hallway, followed by the thunder of boots against marble. Rita stiffened. She clutched Ava instinctively as the twins stirred in their crib. A guard's voice echoed from the corridor. "Sir, breach at the outer perimeter." Ricardo's silhouette appeared in the doorway almost instantly, his expression carved with tension. "Rita," he said, his voice low but urgent, "take the children to the inner lounge. Do not leave there. Do you understand?" She had never seen him like this, shoulders tight, jaw rigid, his eyes darker than the night outside. But it wasn't fear for himself she saw. It was something fiercer. Rawr. Fear for them. "What's happening?" she whispered. "One of my rivals is trying to test boundaries," he replied, already stepping back. "Stay with the children. I'll handle it." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into a flurry of guards and shouted commands. Rita gathered Ava into her arms, lifted the twins, and hurried down the hallway. The estate, usually grand and expansive, now felt like a maze designed to swallow sound and heighten terror. In the inner lounge, she settled the babies and pulled Ava close. She tried to steady her breathing, but every distant shout, every vibration from outside sent another jolt through her. Minutes stretched into long, aching moments. From behind the layers of reinforced walls, muffled voices rose, stern, authoritative, and punctuated by tension thick enough to touch. Rita strained to listen, her heart pounding, imagining all the worst possibilities. Ava whispered, "Is Papa okay?" Rita held her tighter. "He will be," she murmured, hoping her voice didn't tremble. "He always comes back." The estate vibrated faintly, perhaps a slammed vehicle door, perhaps a confrontation turning physical. Rita closed her eyes and prayed. Not just for Ricardo, but for the fragile, growing safety she had begun to carve from the chaos around him. At last, footsteps approached. Heavy, unsteady. When Ricardo entered, he looked as though someone had drained the color from him. His shirt clung to him, his hair ruffled from the wind and tension. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at Rita and the children as though he had run all the way back to confirm they were real. She rose slowly. "Ricardo, what happened?" "It's resolved." The words were clipped, but the tremor beneath them betrayed him. He dragged a hand through his hair. He wanted to see how far he could push. The guards held him back, but his throat tightened. "He shouldn't have gotten that close to my home. To you." Rita stepped forward, searching his face. "But you handled it." "The guards handled it." "That's not the point." He exhaled sharply, pacing the room. "Rita, I brought you here because I needed someone I could trust with the children. Not because I expected you to stand in the crossfire of my life." He paused, meeting her eyes with something heavy and honest. "I worry I've exposed you and Ava to risks neither of you ever agreed to." Something inside her softened, not because he was vulnerable, but because he finally allowed her to see it. "Ricardo," she said gently, "I'm not blind. I knew working here wouldn't be simple. And safety." She glanced at the sleeping twins, at Ava leaning drowsily against her. Safety is something I choose where I can see it. Here, I can see it. I can see you. His breath caught. I trust you, she added, not as a comfort, but as a truth. Silence fell between them, thick and warm, carrying a shift neither of them had expected. The emotional distance he kept so carefully guarded stone walls built from power and responsibility seemed to crumble one crack at a time. The way he looked at her changed too, softening with something he did not voice. He stepped closer. You shouldn't have to trust someone like me with this kind of danger.
But I do, she answered.
And tonight you proved again why. Ricardo's gaze drifted to the children. His chest rose and fell slowly, as though he were grounding himself in the simple fact that they were safe. I thought I was prepared for anything, he admitted quietly. But the idea of losing any of you, he swallowed hard. It terrifies me more than anything my rivals could do. The confession lingered between them, raw and startling. Rita placed a reassuring hand on his arm. You didn't lose us. We're right here. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was a fragile stillness, suspended by emotion neither of them dared articulate fully, but both acknowledged in the quiet space between their breaths. Eventually, Ricardo inhaled deeply. I need to check on the perimeter again, he said, but his voice was no longer strained. Stay here with them. I'll be back soon. She nodded. He hesitated at the doorway, glancing back at the children as if memorizing the sight. Then he left, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. That night, long after the estate had settled back into an uneasy calm, Ricardo drifted quietly through the nursery. Rita woke briefly to the sound of the door creaking open and watched from the sofa, where she had fallen asleep with Ava in her arms. He moved softly from crib to crib, checking the twins' breathing, brushing their tiny fists with his fingertips. He stepped to Ava next, tucking her blanket under her chin with a tenderness that made Rita's heart ache. He lingered longer than necessary, as if seeking reassurance that the world had not changed in the minutes he'd been gone. Rita said nothing. She didn't need to. When he finally stepped out, he paused just long enough to look back at her, at the children, at the life he was trying and sometimes failing to protect. His expression was unreadable, but it carried something she hadn't seen before. A man realizing his heart had never been as guarded as he believed. And for the first time since she entered his home, Rita understood that danger was not the only thing waiting at the gates. Sometimes it was change. Weeks slipped by quietly, an unfamiliar gentleness settling over the mansion like a long-denied blessing. The twins grew steadier, braver, lighter. What had once been a pair of frightened shadows clinging to survival had begun to bloom into two little boys with opinions, preferences, and mischievous sparks in their eyes. Their first babbled attempts at up and more became small celebrations. Every new sound was greeted with applause from the staff, who had watched them endure too much silence for too long. The boys began pointing at things they wanted: Ava's curls, Ricardo's wristwatch, the jar of biscuits, the moon outside the window, tiny gestures that said we finally trust the world to respond to us. And Ava's sweet Ava thrived under the weight of two new admirers. The twins followed her everywhere, waddling behind her with their uneven steps, arms raised like she was the sun they expected to orbit. She braided flowers into their hair. She taught them little hand games. She pulled giggles from them that shook the house awake. The staff eased, too. Laughter found its way back into the kitchen. The clatter of pans was no longer tense. Teasing drifted between the cooks. Someone played music during breakfast. The guards stopped carrying their stiffness like armor inside the dining hall. Even the walls seemed brighter. And Ricardo, he changed most of all. The mansion that had once been only a fortress, a workplace, a place he returned to out of necessity, became something startling. Home. He began spending his evenings here, not in smoke-thick meeting rooms or dimly lit warehouses, but in the living room, where the boys tugged on his shirt demanding he join their games, where Ava curled at one end of the couch studying, where Rita moved through the space like a quiet anchor. He still handled business, still led, still commanded, still wore the weight of a world most people would never understand. But for the first time in his life, He stepped out of the shadows before the sun came up. He let the night belong to his family. And Rita, she was becoming more than his son's caretaker, more than a calm presence at the edge of chaos. She became his confidant. It started subtly. A cup of tea left waiting for him when he returned from late negotiations. A soft question, "Are you all right?" that pressed deeper than anyone else dared. A moment where she sat with him in silence, not afraid of the monsters he'd buried in the quiet. Then the small moments multiplied. Some nights, they ended up at the dining table long after the house fell asleep. She would listen while he spoke of the twins' mother, of mistakes that left old bruises, of the fear of raising children in a world that swallowed innocence whole. She didn't flinch or pity or lecture. She simply listened steadily, as if she had enough strength for both of them. On other nights, she talked instead about her own childhood, about her dreams that had been forced onto shelves, about the people she'd lost and the ones she wanted to protect. He found himself sharing truths he had never spoken aloud and wanting more of her honesty in return. He began relying on her presence in ways he had never allowed himself to rely on anyone. She had become the axis around which the entire household spun, and without her, the newly formed peace would collapse. One evening, after a particularly taxing day, the calm in the living room felt like a balm. The twins had exhausted themselves climbing over Ricardo like he was a mountain made solely for their amusement. They napped in intermittent bursts, waking only to find either him or Rita within reach before dozing again. Rita was curled on the couch reading, her legs tucked beneath her, hair slipping loose from its bun. Ricardo sat beside her, broad shoulders relaxed for the first time all day. He felt oddly grounded, like her nearness stitched something in him back together. Eventually, the boys clambered back onto the couch, one crawling onto Rita's chest, the other onto his. Within minutes, both toddlers had drifted into soft, open-mouthed sleep. The weight of his son's tiny body against him, it undid something inside Ricardo. Rita looked over at him, the dim lamp casting a golden glow across her face. Exhaustion softened her features, but there was a quiet tenderness there too, something she rarely let herself show when she thought anyone was watching. And in that moment, with the house silent around them, with the twins breathing steadily across their chests, they looked like a picture from a life he had never allowed himself to want. He watched her, the rise and fall of her breath, the curve of her fingers resting protectively around the sleeping boy, the way her head tipped slightly as she fought her own exhaustion. For years, Ricardo had lived in constant motion, calculating, leading, surviving. His life had been an empire built from blood and steel, never meant to soften for anything as fragile as hope. But here, with Rita half asleep beside him, and their sons sprawled across them both like they had chosen this arrangement and would accept no other, he felt something unfamiliar. Longing. Not desire. He'd felt desire before, and this was nothing like it. This was deeper. More dangerous. This was the realization that he didn't just want her presence in his house. He wanted her in his life. In his mornings, in his nights, in every breath between. He wanted her laughter in the hallways, her voice in his decisions, her hand guiding the twins as they grew. He wanted the quiet comfort of her understanding, the warmth she carried without meaning to, the way she looked at him like he was a man worth saving. He wanted more. More of her time. More of her trust. More of her heart, though he barely understood that part himself. As he studied her sleeping profile, something settled in his chest with the weight of truth. He wasn't just grateful to her. He wasn't just drawn to her. He wanted a life with her, a real one. Not the temporary arrangement he once thought this was. Not a caretaker for his sons. Not an employee under his protection. But a partner. Someone who belonged here not because he needed her, but because he couldn't imagine this home without her. Rita shifted slightly, her head resting against the back of the couch. A strand of hair slipped forward, brushing her cheek. Without thinking, Ricardo reached out and gently tucked it behind her ear. She didn't wake, but the moment seared itself into him. This was no longer a house that needed her. This was a family that existed because of her. And he was falling in love with the woman who had quietly taught his home how to breathe again. The twins were still asleep on their chests when Ricardo finally shifted, easing his son into the crook of the couch. Rita stirred at the movement, blinking slowly, her gaze soft with the remnants of sleep. For a suspended instant, they simply looked at each other, she with quiet awareness, he with a storm he no longer knew how to hide. But when her eyes dropped to the boys, when she brushed a tender hand over their tiny backs, something inside him tightened painfully. He knew exactly how dangerous this happiness was, and how fragile. By morning, that fear had settled fully over him. Ricardo found Rita in the garden after sunrise, the twins crawling clumsily in the grass, while Ava played sentinel beside them. Rita looked peaceful, the early light warming her features, but Ricardo's chest felt like it had turned to stone. He waited until Ava wandered toward the fountain before speaking. Rita, his voice betrayed more than he intended. "We need to talk." She looked up immediately. Concern flickered in her eyes. "What's wrong?" He exhaled slowly. "You deserve a quiet life. A safe life. One without the shadows that follow me." Her brows knit together. "Ricardo, you know the truth of what I am," he continued, gaze lowering to the twins. "What I've built, what I run, it will always be dangerous. I won't pretend otherwise. And I won't chain you to it." Her breath caught, not at his words, but at the heavy finality underneath them. "You think you're protecting me by asking me to leave," she said softly. His jaw clenched. "If danger ever touches them again." "It won't," she cut in, standing. "And not because I run." Her voice steadied with something fierce and unshakable. "Running isn't protection, Ricardo. Standing with someone is." The twins watched them with wide eyes, sensing tension they couldn't understand. One of them whimpered, trying to crawl toward her. Rita lifted him instantly, pressing a kiss to his hair. "They need me," she whispered. "You see it. You feel it." He did. Their attachment to her had deepened into something bone-deep, something that frightened him almost as much as it soothed him. "And I'm not leaving these boys," Rita added, meeting his gaze without wavering. "Not for the world. Not even for fear." Her certainty cracked something inside him. For years he had survived by anticipating threat, by assuming loss before it struck. But here was Rita choosing to stay, to love, in spite of the darkness she knew stood at his back. "Don't you see?" she said, voice gentle now. "The answer isn't sending me away. It's changing the world. You're afraid will destroy this." He stared at her, stunned by the simplicity of her conviction, by the audacity of believing he could change anything about an empire built on decades of blood. But the idea lodged itself in him. Not impossible, not foolish, just new, and once spoken, it refused to be ignored. The transformation didn't happen in a single day. It began with phone calls, then meetings, then long nights in a study where maps of influence were torn apart and rebuilt with new rules, new boundaries, new lines he refused to let danger cross. He shifted power. He cut ties with men who thrived on chaos. He redirected operations into legitimate channels, tightening the leash on anything that had once risked exploding into violence. The mansion felt the tremor of change too, but in the gentlest ways. The twins thrived with a rhythm of daily affection and predictable calm. Their nightmares faded. Their vocabulary grew in bursts. They laughed louder, played bolder, trusted deeper. Ava, too, blossomed, her confidence anchoring itself in the stability she had never had before. One crisp morning, while Ricardo lifted her up to reach a jar on a high shelf, she blurted the word without thinking. "Papa?" The word froze in the air between them. Ava gasped, eyes wide, as if she expected correction or anger. But Ricardo only paused, hand stilling on the jar. Something warm and unguarded spread slowly across his face. He didn't correct her. He didn't even want to. The little girl's relieved grin lit the entire kitchen. Rita had seen the moment from the doorway. When their eyes met, her expression softened in that quiet, unreadable way that always disarmed him.
She didn't speak. She didn't need to.
He was becoming exactly what he had once feared he could never be. That evening, he found her in the nursery, tucking blankets around the now sleeping twins. She smoothed their hair, lingering as though memorizing every line of their small faces. When she turned, Ricardo was standing in the doorway. "Come," he said quietly. She followed him into the dim hall, and he closed the door behind them. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of a distant clock. He faced her with a vulnerability that would have terrified him months ago. "You asked me once," he said, "to change the world I feared would destroy this family." He swallowed hard. "I've been trying." "I know," she whispered. "I see it." He stepped closer. "I don't want you to stay because you were hired," he said, voice low and earnest. "I don't want you here out of duty to the twins or gratitude or protection." Another breath. "I want you here because we're building something together. Something real." Her lips parted slightly, breath catching. Hope flickered bright and raw in her eyes. "So I'm asking you, Rita, would you stay?" His voice crackled with truth. "Stay because you choose this life. Choose them." "Choose," he hesitated, then finished softly, "choose me." For a moment, time held its breath. Then Rita stepped forward, placing her hand against his chest. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the full weight of finally belonging. "Yes." A whisper like a vow. "Yes, Ricardo. I'll stay." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with certainty. Not as a nanny. Not as an employee. Her hand curled lightly into his shirt. But as a woman who has found a home she never knew she needed. The tension drained from him, replaced with something fierce and grateful and impossibly tender. He lowered his forehead to hers, and the simple contact felt like a promise sealed without words. The next morning dawned soft and golden. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, warming the wooden floor and catching dust motes in the air like drifting stars. Rita stood at the stove, humming quietly as she cooked, her hair loose and glowing in the morning light. The smell of eggs and something sweet filled the room. Ricardo entered holding one twin, the little boy still clinging to his shirt with sleepy fists. Ava sat at the table feeding the other toddler with the solemn concentration of someone performing an important duty. The mansion, once cold, once echoing with loneliness, felt full.
Alive. Complete.
Ricardo paused in the doorway, memorizing everything. Rita's soft smile when she glanced back at him, Ava's giggle when the baby smeared food on her cheek, the quiet peace of a home reborn. This was his family now. Not by blood alone. Not by obligation.
But by choice.
And for the first time in his life, the world outside these walls didn't frighten him, because what he was building inside them was stronger.